Magandang araw, podmates. Si Howie Severino muli. Our guest today may have one of the most politically challenging jobs in government. Chuck Crisanto, Executive Director of the Human Rights Violations Victims Memorial Commission, a government agency created by law back in 2013. Its mandate is to make sure that victims of human rights violations during martial law are memorialized. That mission, of course, has not exactly been welcomed by the new government of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Magandang araw sa iyo, Chuck Crisanto.
Magandang araw rin, Howie, and sa lahat ng nakikinig sa iyo.
Chuck, before we continue, just a statement of disclosure on my part. Chuck Crisanto and I were high school classmates in the 1970s, part of the so-called martial law generation. So we've known each other for a long time. So nice to talk to you again, Chuck. Chuck, you've been executive director of the Human Rights Memorial Commission only since 2018. No? A few months ago, soon after the May presidential election won by Ferdinand Marcos Jr. or Bongbong Marcos, you were reported in some media reports to be quote unquote racing against time in your rush to digitize martial law era documents. No? What were you worried about then? Why were you racing against time?
Well, I was worried about the narratives leading up to the election of May 2022, an avalanche of false news, an avalanche of narratives that seek to paint our history as a golden age and denying that certain atrocities may have been committed, saying those are part of a collateral damage of a war of secession in the South, and perhaps participants from the New People's Army who suffered brutally under the regime. The data, on the other hand, shows that many of the people who came forward when the human rights victims claims were asked for people to come forward and file claims, they numbered 75,749. That's a lot of people. And while the claims board places a higher standard for evaluating evidence to produce 11,103 verified, and this is a government statistic already. This is the floor statistic of 11,103 people who suffered human rights violations in various degrees. This is a treasure trove of information that I don't want to be erased from the nation's history. And part of that is to put it in certain forms for future generations to look back into. It may be destroyed by fire, it may be destroyed by flood. And one measure now, modern times, is to digitize that entire collection.
So were you worried back then, this is about 4 months ago, right after the May elections, that there would be an intentional effort to erase documents, to erase this part of our history in a physical way? That's why you were digitizing documents and other pieces of paper from that time.
As you know, Howie, when we were younger, I was a chess player. And as a chess player, I have various options in playing my moves. Mm-hmm. So I always evaluate several options. If this is the worst case scenario, this is the best case scenario. And in these different scenarios, digitization is something that comes into play for memorialization in the modern age.
So now, 4 months later, what's the status of this race against time? Are you winning? Have you lost? One of your strategies was to digitize as fast as you can all of these documents. No? So what's the current status of this digitization and your other efforts to, quote unquote, race against time?
The digitization process covers not only the primary collection, but other collections coming our way. But I'm focusing on the primary collection. What is the primary collection? The primary collection are all of the approved resolutions of the Human Rights Victims Claims Board when they provided 10 billion pesos in reparations. This collection will also include handwritten salaysay, affidavits, as well as other pieces of evidence to bolster their claim. That's why the Claims Board approved it. This has been digitized already, and I have set them for storage and archiving. Perhaps I will send two here in our country, one in North America, one in Europe, part in the cloud, and one maybe in my house.
Okay,
the redundancy of the collection in digitized form ensures that there will be very difficulty in toying around with the data that we now have. Because the danger is, what if someone wants to add or subtract from the primary collection? The primary collection can be opened later on, or can be opened even now, if we are able to, let's say, evaluate and cross-tab the names of perpetrators as broadcast by the victims themselves. That would be something that the Memorialization Commission does not do, but it can be used later on by someone in the prosecutorial field or someone who wants to exact justice among those who were provided recognition, reparation, but not yet total justice.
So I understand, there's voluminous material na kailangan i-digitize. No? So tapos na ba to? Yung pag-digitize nito, itong plano mo na put it in the cloud, put some, I guess put some in hard drives scattered in different places. Tapos na ba to? Itong
For the
process
primary collection, tapos na yan.
Okay,
so
primary collection.
Safekeeping with others. We're also trying to index it further because part of the archive is inaccessible to scholars, people like you, if we cannot look and mine this data. Supposing of the data, and this is part of what we're doing, would you like to know how many victims were actually males or females? Simple demographics. And our data shows 77% of those who were recognized were male. The Claims Board did something awesome in the sense that the human rights violations were classified according to the degree of human rights violations levied on that person. So I know, Howie, you were illegally detained during that period. So that was without a warrant, arbitrary detention. So you'd receive, I think, 2 points or 3. But if you lost a finger or you lost your life, then you would be given a point of 10. And that would also be commensurate to the amount of reparation that each family or that person suffered. 10 points means you were killed, you were disappeared, you were...
Bring my own case, no, Chuck. But just as an aside, I didn't bother to file any claim because I felt like I didn't really suffer as much as others, and I thought there might be limited money to go around. But anyway, so napakarami tong dokumento, no? And of course, you mentioned earlier that there are competing narratives. And people like you who have access to evidence would say that some of these competing narratives are false. Has there been any indication na this collection is under threat? Is there's a risk that yun nga ma-physically erase sila? Kasi yun ang sabi mo nga, as a former chess player, no, you're considering these scenarios. So, is there any indication that some of the worst case scenarios may still happen, or has part of it happened already? Ano bang experience in the last 4 months since you started worrying about this shortly after the election?
For those who can see us on video, my backdrop shows the Freedom Memorial Museum. That is to be built. The funding for which comes from interest on the 10 billion fund for reparations, not lower than 500 million. And the Bureau of the Treasury did issue that over time, the commission has something like 660 million in trust funds to build this. And we have been spending to clear the area of UP buildings and relocate them, and been accessing that fund so that the museum lot can be cleared and we can begin starting the building of what you see at my back.
Okay.
2-3 years ago, the Department of Budget and Management had already tried to return all of our trust funds and say it goes to the General Treasury and you don't have access to it. I had to go to Congress and seek an alliance between the minority and the majority in order to include that special provision for the trust fund back in what we call the General Appropriations Act. Without that, I will have no access to the trust fund reserved for building the museum. This is the physical structure which will house the primary collection.
Okay.
For 2023, under the DBM secretary, who has to be confirmed, it has been removed once again. And so if it remains as it is in the National Expenditure Program and not included in the General Appropriations Act of 2023, there would be no money to build the museum. That's a definite threat.
Okay. So alam ko yung agency mo has a mandate that covers quite a number of things. One of them, yung nabanggit mo, yung preserving the documents through digitization and also safeguarding the physical collection, no? And then nabanggit mo na your agency, the commission, was created to also build a physical structure. Itong museum na sinasabi mo, yung design nga nasa likod mo ngayon, no? That will house all of these documents, no, all of this evidence and testimonies of human rights victims during martial law. So itong museum na to, just again, as a matter of disclosure, you had asked me, the commission had asked me to be part of the panel that would be choosing the design, so this was the design that was chosen by the majority. This hasn't been built, no? So, kasi your commission was created 2013. It's now 9 years later. And then naabutan na ng pangalawang Marcos government. So, what are the prospects for getting this museum built now? Kasi sabi mo nga, now, it's become an even bigger problem because natanggalan ng budget.
I normally answer speculative questions the way the press secretary answers. That I cannot speculate also if that's a speculation.
Okay, well, it's more than a speculation because you just mentioned na there are some serious obstacles, no? So let's just put it that way. I mean, the prospects are not getting brighter, no, for this museum. So ngayon pa lang, correct me if I'm wrong. So wala nang pondo para gawin itong martial law museum at the moment. No,
that's incorrect. The DBM presented to Congress that they don't want this special provision for the trust fund to be included in the General Appropriations Act of 2023.
Okay.
I will have a budget hearing this Thursday, and perhaps with some allies, both from the minority and majority, convinced that this actually be included. So it's not yet
Hindi pa final.
It's lost.
Okay,
yes.
but that's
and then we have also allies in the Senate, and hopefully we can enlighten many of the senators and the lawmakers that this museum is not a structure that is anathema to the aims of the administration for unity. In fact, my vision is it could be a place where dialogue can ensue. And so that this Human Rights Museum is the contribution of our country to the international community of Human Rights Museum and should be seen in that light, not as an affront to the father of the sitting president, but as a clear recognition that these things happen due to the context by which he had ruled at that time, and that furthermore, moving forward, that the administration can promise. And I think that can be done, and that is there are signals that it can actually be executed, that no gross human rights violations will happen in this administration. That's my optimism. That's my hope.
Yes, and it sounds very noble and enlightened on your part, Chuck. No, but sabi mo nga, the DBM, which is actually ang mission nila is really to think through the nuts and bolts of how government money is spent. They're already proposing not to allocate money here. Sabi mo nga, there will be hearings where you will present this argument, no, and you have allies in Congress. But of course, everyone knows that the president also has allies, and I guess you're counting on both the president and his allies to see your point of view about this. To see this in a wider context. No, so well, we wish you luck. No, we wish you luck.
Our allies are few, and they have a super majority
because the museum is. It's not just to remember, human rights victims or human rights violations victims generically. I mean, in the law, it was created to remember human rights victims during the first Marcos regime. No, so it's unavoidable nga na some will see this as an affront, especially kung yung narrative ng iba ay wala naman masyadong nangyaring masama during that time, or wala masyadong human rights violation. In fact, walang sa Marcos family, meron na bang umaamin na may naganap na human rights violations during martial law during the first Marcos regime?
I have nothing on record of a public statement of that nature.
Oo nga eh, kasi to build this museum would be kind of a physical reminder, acknowledgement, admission by the government, since this is a government project. Na
the government has already admitted.
Nangyari nga lahat yan.
And spent 10 billion already. It's in the law.
Yes, so I understand.
It's something that the government has done already. And because the government has recognized it, and in its recognition has brought also in the international community recognition of the Philippines as having done that, having that difficult task of actually identifying victims of a certain period in its past administration. Yes. That's so difficult because not many nations, including those in Africa, in Europe, Middle East, or even here in Asia, has that transition from dictatorship to democracy ever been smooth. We are still in the transitional phase of moving to full democracy. And a museum such as this is one step forward. It's not the last step. It is one step forward, but among the different nations, we're steps ahead already.
Okay.
Indonesia has never recognized this in the manner by which the Philippines has done so.
Yes. Well, you're talking about a law that was created in 2013. So back then, maaring sabihin na, this was a step forward. But as you know, in the Philippines and globally around the world, no, there is a serious debate about the future of democracy. No, so while there was progress, back when this was enacted, itong batas, which was enacted under the administration of President Aquino, Noynoy Aquino. No? Itong current government headed by Marcos has it ever mentioned this law? And
allow me to provide some backdrop. When the law was enacted, it had to pass also the Senate, and in the Senate, our president now was a sitting senator.
Okay.
He was Senator Marcos, and this bill, RA 10368 in its bill form, was also present there. He did not file a written opposition to the bill. Okay. In fact, the architect of martial law signed the bill quickly, and he was the Senate president then. Now part of the legal counsel of the sitting president, and I'm talking about the very durable Senator Juan Ponce Enrile. So
Eternal.
even from that score,
Okay.
in 2010, people who were knowledgeable about what this museum meant were present, and they did not actively go against it.
Okay.
In fact, Enrile signed it,
Mm-mm.
and you
Okay.
see his signature on the law.
Okay, they did not object, but they did not also explicitly support. And of course, they were also not the majority back then, and Aquino was in power back then. No? So I guess they just went along with the flow. No, the
Well,
political flow
Enrile
at
could
that
have
time.
made things difficult sitting as the Senate president. And there are many
What did he actually
powers
say?
of
I
a
mean, do you
Senate
recall?
president.
What was the debate about? Maybe some of our listeners are no longer that aware of Enrile's role, no? But he was the Secretary of Defense during martial law. He was one of the enforcers, one of the policymakers during the martial law era, no? But sinasabi mo nga, with a touch of irony, he was one of those who signed this law, no, which was eventually signed by President Aquino, no. So
You could see that as a type of apology or a type of making up for past sins. It could be
Contrition?
interpreted in many ways,
yeah,
but the fact remains he did not oppose it and he signed it into law.
okay,
And the president as senator then, even though he will say he's a minority, could have lodged a complaint or a dissenting opinion that would be found in the journal, but there is none.
Okay, so this law that created this agency, which you now head, no, you're the executive director. 2013 pa to. It is now 2022, 9 years later. It is supposed to help everyone remember martial law, the human rights violations during that time, and yet we have another Marcos in power. No, so what was actually done in the last 9 years to make people aware of the dark side of martial law? Kumbaga, I mean, kahit sabihin natin, there were some achievements, as many of the supporters of this administration have been saying. Your agency is mandated to remind everyone, to educate people about the darker aspects of martial law. So, paano nangyari yun? I mean, you had this law, you have this budget, 9 years na nakalipas, and yet mukhang parang there are certain lessons that people have not learned.
The history says that from 2013 up to my appointment, that's a period that I'm not totally responsible for, because my entry formally as the executive director only came in at 2018, last quarter of 2018. By January of 2019, I had only 3 permanent people beside me, myself, my IT, and my accountant. And from there, I had to build an organization from scratch. The beauty of the RA 10368 is that the lessons of martial law should actually be provided exposure, promotion, taught in public institutions. And that's why in our Board of Trustees, the Secretary of DepEd, or the Department of Education, sits, as well as the chair of the Commission on Higher Education. These are the 2 public educational institutions that should have spread the lessons learned from the martial law period. We tried to have an essential truth summit in order to bring everyone on board, all of the curriculum development people, the master teachers, the senior educational people, to determine what is the essential truth about martial law. That summit never occurred.
Okay,
I didn't get support from the public institutions.
Okay.
that sit on my board.
Yeah. Well, you did take over in 2018 nga, sabi mo nga, and then in January 2019, parang you only had a very, very skeletal staff. So it was very difficult to get anything done. But yun nga, but from 2013 to 2016, ano pa yun, Aquino administration pa yun, no? So this agency existed for at least 3 years under the Aquino administration, who probably had, it was in its interest for all of these, martial law experiences, the suffering that happened then, to be remembered, no? So, kumbaga, sinasabi mo, wala rin masyado nangyari during that time.
No, I have
yun ang isang
of walang masyadong nangyari, Howie. I'm sorry to interrupt. A lot of things did occur, and they were unprecedented. What did occur? By 2014, after the law was passed, the Human Rights Victims Claims Board was organized. And that was the call for all those who felt that they were victims of the martial law era to come forward. Initially, they thought that only about 10,000 people would arrive. Seeing the class suit in Hawaii filed by Attorney Swift, wherein 10,000 people said that the Marcos regime had hurt them. They were only expecting 10,000. But 75,000 did arrive. And they were only a 9-man board. And they had to seek extension from the Senate to extend their work of hearing, receiving, and evaluating the victims of martial law. The Memorial Commission had to wait for the claims board to come out with the role of victims. Because without the role of victims, that there would be no step 2. What it could have done then, while waiting for the role of victims, was to search for a suitable memorial site or a museum site. And there were several sites that were actually the preference of then President Aquino. He said, can it be in the BGC area? And I heard that the reason why he had preference for the BGC area was because the young people of today, they go to this BGC area to drink, dance, have fun, forgetting that once upon a time, this was a maximum detention facility where the public was prevented from going and where Ninoy Aquino and Senator Jokno were incarcerated. And he wanted to remind the Filipinos about that this used to be a military camp housing these types of detentions and practicing these types of procedures. So that was one. That was his preference. I was not there when they were choosing a suitable lot in the BGC area. But if I can remember a story of the late Chair Chito Gascon, he told me one area they looked at was a 10-hectare, nice, on top of the hill. Oh, beautiful. But the U.S. Embassy said, that's McKinley Hill. That's embassy property. So they had to look for other properties around it. And later on, there was no suitable property in the BGC area. And that ran for years in its search for the appropriate museum lot.
Okay, so you mentioned nga, this, the compensation that was given to victim claimants, that took a while. You have to gather evidence. There has to be screening kasi maraming nagki-claim. Maaring hindi naman talaga nakaranas ng human rights violation. No? And then this long process to find a location for the museum, etc. But just looking at your website, no, a big part of your mission is, to quote, no, the commission is also mandated to coordinate and collaborate with the Department of Education and the Commission on Higher Education to ensure that the teaching of martial law atrocities, the lives and sacrifices of human rights victims in our history are included in the basic, secondary, and tertiary education curricula. No, I mean, there's just been a lot of critique that hindi pinag-aaralan yung recent history. In fact, history has been downgraded in general in the K to 12 curricula, no? But in particular, recent history, martial law, the history of martial law, the Marcos regime, hindi tinuturo or mali ang tinuturo. Ano naman ang status niya? That part of that important part of the mandate of your commission, no? The teaching of martial law atrocities, yung sacrifices ng human rights victims in our history. Dapat daw ay itinuturo yan sa basic, secondary, and tertiary levels ng ating education system.
In 2015, then Senator Bam Aquino, in a Senate hearing, asked the Secretary of Education, holding up a book, Grade 5, Araling Panlipunan, why are we still teaching what happened 28 years ago in this fashion, a narrative which does not actually represent what had happened? And a small research showed that if we have about 750,000 plus public school teachers and maybe a similar number, maybe lower now, of private school teachers, about 600 to 700,000, the average age of the public school teacher is something like 30 to 35 years of age. None of them live through martial law. So they have this inadequacy for teaching a period where they were not alive in. Of course, we note that you were not alive during the Katipunan era. How could you teach the Jose Rizal and Bonifacio since that happened 100 years ago? And the reason is there was a lot of documentation about that period in time. The martial law period had very little readings and materials about that period. If you'll note, Howie, during that period, there was so much censorship, there was so much suppression of media, and there are some things that I, even now, am just discovering what actually happened 50 years ago. This is new data that's coming to light because of that kind of panoply of deception. But be it as it may, the Department of Education and the Commission on Higher Education did not see this as an important part of their entire education strategy. And sometimes I can understand that the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, they go on top of the list. And by the time you go down, maybe the martial law is only 1 paragraph or 2. I did make a small search in how our security sector teaches the martial law era. So I went to the Philippine Military Academy. How does the PMA teach it? How does the PNPA teach it? How does the Philippine National Police Academy teach it? How does the other security sectors teach that period wherein they were actually harnessed to implement martial law? This is what I found out. Voila. They don't teach it. It's not in their libraries. It's not in their books. It's absent. So the security sector is also lacking, in a sense, in teaching what has been a period wherein they came out of the barracks, politicized, and as they say, the genie left the bottle. However, this much I can share. When I was, my attention was called by then Secretary of National Defense, Lorenzana, and he said, you have to be careful, Chuck, of how you portray our military officers. And I said, in our portrayal, it is factual. One, we should also highlight the heroism of our police and military officers when they did participate. They did not follow orders in the 1986 revolution and sided with the people. That's so historic. And that is also to be contained in the narrative of the Freedom Memorial Museum. So it's not all finger pointing. It is also that change of heart with the military and police establishment at that juncture in our history where it could have erupted into a civil war, but did not. These are the lessons that can be contained also in the Freedom Memorial Museum.
Well, couldn't one of these lessons also be about our recent history is the missed opportunity din, no? Kasi sabi mo nga, yung panahon ni Senator Bam Aquino, he was in the Senate during President Noynoy Aquino's administration. This is 2015, sabi mo nga. And he was pointing out, kind of the outdated or even the wrong information found in Araling Panlipunan textbooks and curriculum. No? Yung irony nga dun is this is during the Aquino administration. So kung hindi nagawa nung Aquino administration, paano magagawa in a non-Aquino? I mean, lalo na in Duterte administration and now the Marcos administration. And the reason that you cite, na there was a lack of information or documentation. But I recall in 2015, ang dami na rin lumabas na libro, no? I mean, a lot of people now have been buying up the Conjugal Dictatorship, no? Yung kind of a classic about martial law. And this was published in the 1970s pa, and there were biographies of Marcos and Imelda. There's been all kinds of history books that have come out na hindi nasama. So, of course, there's more documentation now than in 2015, but certainly there must have already been information and a lot of knowledge about martial law history then that was not being taught. So I'm just, I'm just saying maybe we shouldn't be giving that generation of lawmakers and policymakers a pass at this point. No, it's not finger pointing. I'm just trying to say, there are facts that can be established about why we're in this situation currently. You've called it historical dementia. No, others have called it historical amnesia or denialism or revisionism. Ikaw tinawag mong historical dementia. No, so it's not simply a lack of documentation back then, Chuck. I think you're also up against a major effort to present a different and probably false narrative of what really happened during martial law, which includes denial or even ignoring many aspects of martial law that you're trying to make people remember through your agency.
Howie, you and I in this 60 to 65 age range, spoiler, we belong only to about 4% of the population. The majority of our population is below 30 years old. That's a significant 30, 40. And none of them actually, and even the architect of this Freedom Memorial, when he won this, he started the competition with what's martial law. He was 27 years old. It was not taught in school. He had to do his own research in order to come up with this clenched fist in what he called the fall of brutal. And because of this teaching in the grade school, from starting grade 5 up to high school to college, there's so many gaps in the minds of many Filipinos about what really happened. And it is these gaps, these holes, which can be quickly filled by someone who has another narrative. If you're not able to solidify their complete understanding of what our nation had gone through. Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, it's just not a matter of knowledge, because Father Ed De La Torre has a very nice point recently. Truth must come into competition with lies. It has to be competitive in this age of information and social media. So the mere presence of a document does not mean the truth will set us free. It has to be competitive, especially with many of the narratives which pull at people's emotions, which put people in the historical nostalgia of a golden age. Now, that can be quickly corrected if the entire public institutions of our country lent more credence and lent more emphasis in the curriculum of public school kids. Sadly, it did not.
Yes, well, and then now, currently, itong public institutions, they're being controlled by allies of the son of the former dictator, no? And the Department of Education, is headed by Vice President Sara Duterte, who is the daughter of of a former President Duterte who had Marcos buried in the libingan ng mga bayani. No, so you have a very challenging task, Chuck. No,
Well, every dark cloud has a silver lining. And the silver lining I see in the Department of Education is that it is headed by Vice President Sara Duterte, whose grandmother is a recognized heroine of the Yellow Friday movement in Davao City. I remember younger, when there would be a Huelga ng Bayan, they could stop any public transport for 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
And that was led by Nanay Suling.
Yeah.
She was
Suling Duterte.
Heroine.
She was the mother of former President Rodrigo Duterte, and she started
President Rodrigo Duterte.
Yeah, I know. She started the Yellow Friday movement in Davao.
Yes, recognized in 1986, 1987 by President Cory Aquino herself, who went to Nanay Suling and said, "Do you have someone who can run Davao City as OIC?" And for the first year, then prosecutor fiscal Rodrigo Roa Duterte said no. On the second year, he said yes. And that starts him off on his political career. So that, I think, is something that the vice president can express support in that the Freedom Memorial Museum will also point out the contribution of her grandmother in that peaceful revolution.
But has she ever acknowledged her grandmother in that way? I mean, kasi you cited something that happened in 1986, no? President Cory Aquino wanted to appoint her grandmother, si Soledad Duterte, as OIC mayor of Davao, and she instead recommended her son, Rodrigo. But has Sarah ever mentioned that? I mean, sabi mo nga, that's a silver lining, pero is she more, you think she's more her grandmother's granddaughter rather than her father's daughter? I mean, she was not elected vice president because she was the granddaughter of Nanay Suling, no? She, what she had going for her politically was she was the daughter of former president, Rodrigo Duterte.
The silver lining, Howie, is that during that time of the Marcos martial law era, the Duterte clan was not with the Marcos family at that time, except for his grandfather, who served briefly in the 1960s as a secretary for, let's say, government administrative sorts. But his stint there was very short. Mm-hmm. So, in a sense, Sarah did not participate in any of these gross human rights violations.
So, what has she given any indication na may magbabago sa curriculum ng DepEd para maturuan nga yung kabataan tungkol sa kasaysayan na to, yung mga naganap noong martial law, itong nasa ilalim ng inyong mandate na maituro sa mga estudyante yung tungkol sa human rights violations sa mga panahon na yun. Have you received any indication? Do you see any sign that any of this will happen?
Sumulat na kami sa kanya kung uupo siya sa Board of Trustees namin, at kung hindi, kung sinong papadala niyang representante para makonvene naman muli namin ang Board of Trustees. So pinadala na namin yung sulat sa kanya, naghihintay kami ng response sa kanya.
So palapit na itong 50th year marking ng declaration ng martial law. No, earlier before our interview, you said that we shouldn't call it an anniversary, no, kasi that implies that it's a joyous occasion. So let's just mark the declaration of martial law. That is a milestone year, no, 50 years. Not too many people alive today will remember. Many people are already born, pero for you to actually remember the declaration of martial law, no, you should already have been, now you should be in your 70s, no? Siguro earliest, yung late 60s and then 70s. Many people are in their 80s. A lot of people have passed on, no? Will there be any memorial activities by the government? Government muna, and your agency in particular, how will you mark this event?
50 days before September 21, which we see as the date for the declaration, we have been conducting daily events, and we've tried to come out with our content in our Facebook account, in our different social media accounts, and we have produced several videos. I've made the videos from 15 minutes to 10 minutes to 5 minutes, and we also have some TikToks coming out. We're trying to reach the young audience of what we are marking as the 50th year of the martial law period. So we are also partnering with different educational institutions and other NGOs in the manner by which they want to mark this coming September 21 declaration. So there is a list of schedules. We can share this with you later.
There are other bodies, no, outside government that have been raising awareness about our recent history, the martial law history. Bantayog Foundation, for example. There's also a group of artists called the Dakila. No, you're in touch with these, and is there any kind of coordination with them? What kind of effort is going on aside from your own
partnerships with the two organizations that you mentioned? In fact, as a reminder to all of your listeners, after 1986, 3 agencies were formed, particularly in response to the martial law period that just passed. The first is Executive Order Number 1, creating the PCGG, the Presidential Commission on Good Government. The second is the creation of the Commission on Human Rights. And it would only be belatedly in 2013, wherein our commission was created. Of all the government bodies that have been created over time, and they may be something like 75 different government bodies, these are the 3 agencies that deal particularly with or that experience of the martial law period, the Marcos martial law period. One is going after the wealth. One is after instituting practices so that we may not fall into that kind of autocratic regime. And the last, which is what we had, is having a cultural facility and a manner by which the artistic expressions of people can be unleashed, as well as remembering. Remembering is very important, because I always tell this: if a flower blooms in the middle of the desert and then dies, did the flower ever exist? We had this philosophical debate when we were much younger. And the answer is, if that flower is not documented, there is no documentation on that flower, could have been something that have never existed. So if someone was murdered during that period, and that has never been recorded, and the family thus dies away and withers, sayang naman yung buhay na yun. It could not have been remembered, and it could not have taught a lesson for future generations. That's the importance of memory. That's why if you lose memory, then it's as if you did not live a life, because you don't even remember the good or bad things that happened in your life. A nation's memory is very, very important. But what we remember should not be cherry picking. It should always be honest.
Well, speaking of which, it's not like there has been no evidence that has been disseminated to the public. Matagal nang pinag-uusapan ito. There have been, hashtag never again. People who want martial law and human rights violations to be remembered have been quite active then on social media. But there's also significant segment of the population who even when confronted or presented with this evidence, dinideny. And it's not just a Philippine phenomenon, makikita mo to sa Amerika, makikita mo to sa ibang bansa, Parang if the evidence does not agree with your political point of view, diba? If it goes against what you believe politically, there are many people who are willing to deny the facts or deny the existence even of evidence, or to just say that the evidence is false, diba? Even if there's very strong basis for these things, no? Like human rights violations. I mean, dami ng testimony, there are still people who will say na hindi naman talaga nangyari yan, or this is fake, or this is part of a conspiracy, etc. No? So, is it simply a matter of remembering and documentation and gathering evidence? I mean, is there something deeper going on here aside from the lack of remembering?
I remember watching the documentary film, The Kingmaker, wherein Imelda Marcos says something very profound. It still sticks to me. Perception is reality. And that's a very profound statement from her point of view, because you could actually alter your worldview depending on what you believe upon, whether that is fake, truth, or evidence, or whatever. It simply rests on what you want the world to be by trying to say this is what happened. And that's the thing that I think this new age of social media, where information can be individualized or micro-targeted. Someone told me that it used to be when you'd like to listen to the news, and you were in the news before, Howie, I'd sit around and wait for the 8 o'clock news or the 6 o'clock news. And I would gather with my family watching what's the news today. And after the news is broadcast, we'd have a small discussion of what the news was. And I think that kind of conversation among families glued to a TV set, or in the early morning when you open the newspaper with your cup of coffee and there's a discussion, is something worth looking into, because there is a means by which people actually validate how they absorb what is the reality being sent to them. We notice in this new modern age, everyone with a cell phone looks at it, gets his news from Facebook, and sometimes does not even talk to any family member on the dinner table or in the breakfast table. So it's so micro-targeted. The lack of conversation and dialogue, even in small families, bolster what you want to believe in, what you're fed in, and what you'd not like to get out of in your bubble. That is the new phenomena that we have seen in the last 10 years.
Yeah. Well, it also reflects the decline of influence of the news media, no? Kasi nga ang dami ng forms ng media ngayon. So before, the news media was a gatekeeper of public information, and kaya nagkakaroon ng consensus around ano ba talagang nangyari, what were the facts, what is our history, etc. No? But nag-decline na yan, and I guess it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle. And also that's the reason why maraming umaasa sa public education system, no? Kasi yan, that's still a viable channel. Most people still need to go to school, where they will sit in a classroom and teachers will discuss a particular set of information outside of what people are seeing on their mobile phones, no? So, kaya malaki rin yung responsibilidad ng agency mo, no, Chuck, because it's part of your mandate to make sure this history is being taught in collaboration with the Department of Education. But I wanted to ask you, no, you said in one of your messages on your website, your agency's website, we cannot really be truly free until we're free or independent of lies and fake news, disinformation, and historical dementia. No, what did you mean by historical dementia?
Alam mo, nababaliw na tayo eh.
Okay.
and sometimes you see this with very old people. They enter to that. They may be very, very productive while they were young, while they were alive, while they had a good hold of their faculties. But once their memory falters, once they begin cursing their own children. They begin cursing their caregivers, and they become so difficult to care for themselves. And you already see that, wow, this is a real burden. And how can she keep on moving? And how can the family keep on having a stable environment or a peaceful environment, even for dinner? That's dementia coming in and destroying that nuclear family because of someone already forgetting even the name of her son or her daughter or what she just did or what she just ate.
Yeah. Well, what I find remarkable about that analogy, Chuck, is precisely what you described. No, dementia is not just forgetting or it's not just believing in something that's false, but dementia also suggests a certain kind of behavior. No, nabanggit mo nga na we cannot blame the senior members of our family for behaving this way. This is it's a disorder. It's a disease, no? Yung dementia. So people with dementia, they forget, but they also, many people with dementia also lash out, di ba? They curse, they become a burden, this is actually a sickness. Ang sinasabi mo, we're sick, no? We're afflicted with historical dementia. Am I reading too much into what you said?
No,
Chuck, or
you're exactly pinpointing what a society becomes when the bedrock for its discourse is founded on lies and deception. It will not be healthy. It will fall into disorder. It will only cause people to divide against one another. And a society based on truth, or in our constitution, truth, justice, freedom, and love, you'd have a better society. And this is for our younger people to choose. They have to choose. They have to choose that we have to leave this kind of dementia, itong disorder, itong kabaliwan, in order to set our country straight. I'll point out for the others who may not know, may isang there's a European country who fell into dementia. And the one who led them was Hitler. Talagang baliw. They wanted to bring a 1,000-year Reich, and the problems of the world rests on the existence of the Jewish people. And the final solution was just kill them all. What a disorder. What dementia. How had they fallen so far down the drain? However, after World War II, they did pick themselves up. They decided they will espouse liberty. They will commit to freedom, and they will never turn back to authoritarian ways. And now Germany is one of the leading economies in Europe and one of the freer nations in the world. It can be done, and the Philippines can do it.
Yeah, but before they reach this more desirable state, Chuck, no, they had to go through Nazism and Hitler and World War II and all of that. It's a pretty scary scenario you're describing, Chuck, no? So I hope we don't have to go through all of that before we come out a better country. So, but is that a possible outcome of this historical dementia? Sabi mo, we're in the midst of historical dementia, no? And then you said that one European country, Germany, also went through this and had to go through this terrible period where nearly the entire world had to suffer. No, of course we're not Germany, but at the same time, parang I think it's everyone's hope that we don't suffer in the same way before we come out better educated and chastised maybe or having learned our lesson.
That's true. That's why I call it a historical dementia, because it can infect a large population, and it could be something that can be actually also contagious for those who have weak immunity systems in the mind.
So what's the solution to historical dementia? I mean, let's end with a note of hope here, Chuck. No, so sabi mo nga, young people these days, they have a choice. No, they can. They can choose the path that will lead to historical dementia, or they can become better informed people?
Well, the choice for our countrymen, for our young people, is rests on values. I think if they commit to values of truth, then we have a way out. If they have more commitments to, let's say, the values of freedom, then they will fight for these things. If they will be more creative in trying to break out from this authoritarian manipulation, which they can see, it would be better for them to do so. So it is really up to them on how they will unshackle themselves from these chains that bind them. All we have to do, Howie, is to egg them on, to perhaps mentor them, to show them the way. But we are not anymore the Moses who will lead them out of the 40-year wandering in the desert. And it's been more than 40 years for our country. We're already on our 50th year wandering in the desert.
Okay, well, I guess that's a hopeful note. I want to thank you, Chuck, for your thoughts and for persisting in this challenge of remembering and educating us on how to remember. Some may call it a Sisyphean task or a mission impossible, but as Nelson Mandela said, it always seems impossible until it's done. So,
Yes.
Mabuhay ka, Chuck Crisanto, Executive Director of the Human Rights Violations Victims Memorial Commission. Maraming salamat.
Salamat, Howie, at sa lahat ng nakikinig sa iyo.
Hi, I'm Howie Severino. Check out the Howie Severino podcast, an original for GMA News and Public Affairs. New episodes will stream every Thursday. Listen for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and other platforms.